Alucin thinks he's untouchable in court, until Judge Frank Caprio brings him crashing back to reality. What unfolds is the spectacular collapse of a man who truly believed the law didn't apply to him. Brandon Whitmore, a 33-year-old heir to the Whitmore construction fortune, is the fourth-generation beneficiary of a company worth approximately $600 million, built over 3 generations since his great-grandfather founded it in 1920. The company started by constructing commercial buildings across Rhode Island and Massachusetts before expanding nationally. Today, it is run by Brandon's father, Brandon Whitmore Sr., the current CEO, who has been preparing his son to eventually take executive control. At least, that was the plan. Everyone in the family, and everyone in the company, knows the truth. Brandon is lazy, incompetent, and completely unqualified. For over 10 years, he has been working in the business development department, where his greatest achievement has been occasionally showing up to meetings and signing documents prepared entirely by others. He contributes nothing of value, coasts on his last name, and treats the company like a personal ATM. Brandon lives in an 11,000-square-foot mansion in an exclusive new Portata neighborhood, purchased by his father for $18 million. For his 30th birthday, his father gifted him a collection of luxury cars that most people only see in magazines. A Ferrari SF90 Stradale, a Lamborghini Aventador, a Porsche Taycan Turbo S, and a Mercedes-AMG GT Black Series, with a combined value exceeding $2 million. In Rhode Island's elite social circles, Brandon is known as that insufferable guy, the one who constantly reminds everyone of his wealth, his connections, and his supposedly important surname, as if being born rich makes him superior to ordinary humans. He treats people beneath him with casual contempt and assumes doors will always open simply because of who his father is. This sense of entitlement has followed him into the criminal justice system. Before this case, Brandon had already been arrested 3 times for driving under the influence. Each time, his father hired the most expensive criminal defense lawyers in the state. Charges were reduced. Deals were struck. Probation replaced jail time. Mandatory classes replaced consequences. Any other person would have served serious time by the second offense. This time was different, or at least it should have been. 6 weeks earlier, Brandon was arrested at 2:05 a.m., driving his Ferrari at 120 miles per hour through a residential neighborhood. His blood alcohol level was 0.19%, more than double the legal limit of 0.08. He had just left an exclusive nightclub, where he spent thousands of dollars on bottles of Dom Perignon and Grey Goose vodka, trying to impress a group of women he had met less than an hour earlier. Now he stood charged with his 4th DUI, a crime that under Rhode Island law carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 1 year in state prison, permanent loss of driving privileges, and massive fines. But instead of showing remorse or humility, anything resembling awareness of the gravity of his situation, Brandon walked into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom with an attitude that can only be described as completely delusional. There's a word in Mexican slang, alucinado, used to describe someone who is hallucinating about their own importance. That word fits Brandon perfectly. He walked into court like it was a fashion runway, not a courtroom. At his side was his attorney, Vincent Sterling, a high-powered defense lawyer charging $1,200 per hour. Vincent had warned him repeatedly, dress conservatively, be respectful, show remorse. Brandon ignored every word. When his case was called, Brandon approached the podium and leaned against it casually, like he was ordering a drink at a bar. He pulled out his iPhone 14 Pro Max, encased in 24-karat gold, and began scrolling through messages as if the judge and the entire legal proceeding were beneath his attention. In his distorted, privileged reality, he was too important to take this seriously. He showed zero respect for the judge who held the power to take away his freedom. He assumed his last name and his father's money would shield him, just as they always had. What Brandon didn't understand was that he was about to meet a judge who could not be bought, impressed, or intimidated. And when Judge Caprio finally spoke, everything changed. Judge Frank Caprio, a man with 38 years on the bench, had seen thousands of DUI cases. He had a particular disdain for privileged defendants who believed the rules didn't apply to them. When he noticed Brandon staring at his phone instead of the bench, his irritation was immediate, but controlled. "Mr. Whitmore," the judge said sharply. Brandon didn't respond. "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Caprio repeated, louder this time. Finally, Brandon looked up, visibly annoyed, as if a waiter had interrupted his meal. Yes, he replied. No, Your Honor. No apology. Judge Caprio's voice cut through the courtroom like a whip. Is there anything on that phone more important than the fact that you are facing 1 year in state prison? Brandon sighed, audibly irritated. Look, Judge, he said, already making his biggest mistake. With all due respect, we both know how this is going to end. My lawyer and the prosecutor will work something out. I'll pay a fine I can easily afford, take a few more stupid classes, and move on. The courtroom went silent. Then Brandon added the sentence that sealed his fate. So maybe we can speed this up. I have an important lunch at Providence Oyster Bar in an hour, and I really don't want to be late. Every person in the room froze. His lawyer turned pale. The prosecutor barely hid her smile. Other defendants stared in disbelief. Judge Caprio's expression hardened into something far more dangerous than anger. Cold, absolute certainty. Mr. Whitmore, the judge said slowly, you have just made the greatest mistake of your privileged life. He explained that Brandon had assumed this case would be handled like the previous 3, where money and lawyers erased consequences. But this courtroom was different. This is my courtroom, and I decide what happens here. Judge Caprio rejected any and all plea agreements. He ordered the case to go to full trial and made it clear that if Brandon were convicted, as he almost certainly would be, he would receive the maximum sentence allowed by law. Then came the final blow. I am revoking your bail, the judge said calmly. You will be taken into custody immediately, pending trial. Brandon panicked. You can't do that. Oh yes, Judge Caprio replied. I can. And I just did. The bailiff stepped forward with handcuffs. The sound of metal clicking shut around Brandon's wrists echoed through the courtroom. His $500,000 watch gleamed uselessly above the steel cuffs, a perfect symbol of how money had finally failed him. Brandon spent the next 4 weeks at the Rhode Island Correctional Facility, a place very far from his $18 million mansion. The 8-by-10-foot cell, thin mattress, and shared space with a car theft suspect were a brutal awakening. The food was barely edible. Privacy didn't exist. Comfort was gone. His father visited once. What were you thinking? His father asked quietly. I thought it would be like the other times, Brandon admitted. That's the problem, his father replied. You always assume. Trial began on January 18th. Brandon appeared in prison orange, noticeably thinner, his arrogance gone. Despite a team of elite lawyers, the evidence was overwhelming. Dashboard footage, BAC results, eyewitness testimony, and a documented history of repeated offenses. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Judge Caprio spoke directly to Brandon. You believed mercy meant immunity, the judge said. You believed privilege meant protection. It does not. Brandon was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with parole eligibility after 18 months, 5 years of probation, permanent license revocation, and a $50,000 fine paid to victims of drunk driving. Brandon wept openly as he was led away. The courtroom video went viral, reaching 70 million views. Comments flooded in. Finally, justice. No one is above the law. And that is the story of how a man who believed himself untouchable learned. Too late. That privilege ends where accountability begins.